All right, let's talk about something that sits right at the fascinating intersection of faith, tradition, and just plain old human nature: celibacy, specifically within the clergy. Is it a sacred command, something straight from on high, or is it something else entirely?
So let's just dive right in with the big question. Why are priests and nuns celebrate? I mean, it's a rule that's defined these roles for centuries, but the source we're looking at today suggests the answer we all think we know isn't really the full story. It actually calls this a forgotten question, one we've all just kind of accepted without really digging into where it came from.
So, to find the real answer, we've got to start with a common one. What do most people believe is the reason for this pretty intense commitment?
Yeah, the conventional wisdom, the story we all know, is that celibacy is all about spirituality. It's seen as this path to dedicating your life 100% to God, to become more holy, more sacred, to live a life that's like the saints. It's all about purity and devotion. But what if that's not where the rule actually came from?
And here's where we take a sharp turn. The source makes this really bold claim, stating it just like this: God never told them to do that. Whoa. Okay, so that challenges pretty much the entire foundation of the common belief. If it wasn't a divine mandate, then where in the world did it come from? And maybe more importantly, why?
If it's not from God, then we have to look at it from a completely different angle. Our source presents this not as a deep theological issue, but as something way more practical: an organization's logic.
The source calls it an organizational rule. So think of it less like a sacred law handed down from the heavens and more like a high-stakes corporate policy. It was created by a human institution, by people, to solve a very specific, very practical problem. So what was this problem they were trying to fix?
This shift in perspective is everything. On one side, you have the idea of a divine command, which is absolute, spiritual, and you just don't question it. But on the other side, you have an organizational strategy, something that's pragmatic, goal-oriented, and designed by humans. Seeing it this way is really the key to the whole argument.
And this lays out that strategy perfectly. Step 1 was the goal: create the ideal public leader, someone who could serve everyone equally. Okay, so to do that, step 2, that leader had to be completely unbiased, or clean. Now, what's the biggest source of potential bias for any person? Family, right? So that leads to step 3, the rule: prohibit family attachments. This was all about preventing favoritism, to make sure, as the source puts it, that the arm doesn't bend inward. It's a pretty logical, if extreme, solution to a leadership challenge.
But here is where a perfectly logical rule runs smack into a beautifully complex problem: people. This next part is all about what happens when this clean, organizational strategy meets the messy, unpredictable reality of human nature.
A rule can look perfect on paper, but it has to be lived out by real, breathing human beings. And that's where the friction starts. The cold logic of the system clashes head-on with the fundamental drives that make us human.
I mean, just think about who is actually living under this rule. It's not some uniform group of saints in training. You have people who join young, sure, having never been married, but you also have people who are previously married, people who had kids. Some are even just seeking an escape from a really hard life. They all bring their own life experiences, their pasts, and their human desires right in with them.
There's this powerful Korean idiom from the source that just nails this whole idea. It basically means that when you're struggling, when you're just trying to survive, you can suppress a lot. But once you find stability, once you have some comfort, once the oil fills your belly, those suppressed human desires, those memories, those feelings, they can come roaring back to the surface. Comfort, ironically, can make the rule harder to follow, not easier.
So if it's a man-made rule, and it clashes with our very nature, what are the consequences? This brings us to the real core of the critique being presented in our source material.
Now, this is a really crucial point. The argument isn't against the idea of celibacy in and of itself. The source isn't saying the rule is inherently bad or wrong. The real problem, it argues, lies somewhere else entirely.
The real failure, according to the source, is that the organization created this incredibly difficult standard, but then completely failed to provide the spiritual tools needed to actually meet it. It's like they imposed this massive challenge without offering the genuine teaching or the deep wisdom needed to navigate it successfully.
And this final quote just broadens the whole discussion out. It connects these internal struggles to a much, much larger issue. The argument is, if the spiritual leaders themselves haven't achieved a state of enlightenment, if they can't find their own answers, then how can they possibly provide answers for the rest of humanity? The problem suddenly becomes a symptom of a much deeper spiritual void. So after all of that,
What are the big takeaways? Let's quickly recap the main points, and then we'll finish with one last thought-provoking question for you to chew on.
Okay, first, celibacy can be seen not as some divine mystery, but as a practical strategy for creating impartial leaders. Second, this strategy is human-made, designed to solve a very human problem. And finally, the core critique isn't about the rule itself, but about the system's failure to provide the deep spiritual support needed to uphold it.
And that leaves us with this final question. And this goes way beyond just this one topic. In any system of belief, any organization, any government, how do we tell the difference between a foundational divine principle and a practical human-made policy? What are the right questions to ask? That's something to think about. Thanks for joining us.